Welcome to the deep dive. You know how we do things here. Unpacking the really complex stuff to help you understand it all a bit better. And today, we're going to be looking at ego defense mechanisms.
Ooh, those are fun.
They really are. And luckily, we have an amazing guide, Anna Freud's The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense.
Classic.
A total classic. This deep dive, it's like getting a behind-the-scenes look at how your own mind works.
Yeah.
Ever wonder how you actually cope with those, like, uncomfortable, icky feelings? Well, we are about to find out.
Okay, so Anna Freud, she lays out some, pretty foundational psychoanalytic theory to start.
Okay.
It all begins, really, with this structural model of the psyche, the I, the ego, and superego.
Right. Like the trifecta.
Exactly. So the I, that's all about our primal urges and desires.
Like the I want it now part of us.
Totally. And then the superego, think of it like our internalized moral code.
So all those shoulds and shouldn'ts we've picked up along the way.
Exactly. And then right smack dab in the middle, stuck between a rock and hard place, is the ego. Oh, poor ego.
I know, right? Trying to manage the I and the superego, all those demands.
A delicate balancing act.
You could say that again.
Yeah.
But here's the thing that Anna Freud really emphasizes. The ego's role as the observer. It's not just playing mediator. It's constantly gathering information, like from all over, inside and outside, processing it all, and then making these decisions about how we're going to function.
So the ego's doing all this behind-the-scenes work to keep us feeling balanced.
Basically.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So how does that actually, play out in real life? What are these defense mechanisms, and how do they show up in our everyday lives?
Well, you can kind of think of the ego as this mental bodyguard, you know?
Okay, I like that.
It's constantly on high alert, scanning for anything that could disrupt our well-being.
Threats.
Threats, exactly. Like, for example, impulses from the I that could get us into hot water.
Right, those urges we probably shouldn't act on.
Exactly. Or those harsh judgments from the superego that can, really make us feel bad about ourselves.
That inner critic we all have. Yeah, exactly. And then there are actual, real-world dangers, too.
Right, so external threats as well.
And whenever the ego senses a threat, it deploys a defense mechanism. It's all about protecting us from experiencing, too much anxiety or distress. And the sneaky part is it does this without us even knowing it's happening.
So how do we even know these defenses are there? Are there clues?
Oh, for sure. There are some telltale signs. Anna Freud pointed to a few ways we can actually see these defenses at work.
Okay, I'm all ears.
For example, there are what she called apparatuses.
Apparatuses, that sounds complicated.
Not really. They're those little slips of the tongue or, those embarrassing memory lapses we all have sometimes.
When you call your teacher mom.
Exactly. Or when you completely blank on someone's name right when you need it.
Oh, that's the worst. It's like my mind goes completely blank.
I know, right? It happens to the best of us.
Yeah. So these seemingly random errors.
They're not as random as you might think.
Hmm.
They can actually give us little glimpses into what the ego is trying to keep hidden.
Interesting. So those embarrassing moments could actually be revealing something deeper. I'm starting to see how these could be more than just random mistakes.
Right.
Okay. What other clues are there?
Another fascinating one is something called transference. This is how we kind of unconsciously bring past relationship patterns into our current ones.
Like we're replaying those old dynamics, but with new people.
Exactly. It's like our unconscious is trying to work something out through those repeated patterns. And here's the thing. We tend to do this even in therapy.
So therapy becomes like this stage where those hidden defenses can actually be seen.
Precisely. And sometimes those defenses, they actually turn to actions. Anna Freud called this acting out in therapy.
Acting out. So it's like the defense mechanism isn't just an internal thing anymore. It's actually spilling out into the real world.
Exactly. It becomes observable. And she suggested that analysts, therapists, should pay attention to this acting out. It can be really insightful. Not just focusing on, the instinctual impulse behind it, more like a detective, searching for clues.
Oh, I like that analogy. It's like we're peeling back the layers to understand what's really going on.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm starting to get the bigger picture here. These defense mechanisms.
They're not just abstract concepts.
Right. They're actually playing out in our everyday lives, often without us even realizing it. So let's get specific. What are some of these defense mechanisms, and how do they actually work?
Okay, so let's start with one that's probably the most well-known.
Repression.
Repression. Oh, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's when the ego pushes unwanted thoughts or feelings basically out of conscious awareness, buries them.
So it's like we just forget about them.
Sort of,
Huh.
but it's a bit more complicated than just forgetting.
Okay, so how does it work? Well, Anna Freud gave this example of a young woman who was repressing feelings of hatred toward her mother.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
It is, and it all stemmed from unresolved penis envy.
Penis envy. Can you explain that a bit more? I think some of our listeners might be unfamiliar with that concept.
Right. So it was like a core concept in psychoanalysis at the time.
Okay.
The idea being that during a certain stage of development, girls realize that they lack a penis, and they
Okay.
feel envious of boys.
I can see how that could lead to some complex emotions.
Absolutely. And potentially, unconscious conflicts. But getting back to repression, you might think, well, if something is repressed, it just disappears, right?
I mean, it kind of makes sense. Out of sight, out of mind.
Not quite. It's not that simple.
Okay.
It's more like those thoughts and feelings are buried alive. They might be out of our conscious awareness, but they can still have a huge influence on our lives, on how we think, feel, and behave.
Wow. So even though we're not consciously thinking about them, they're still there, lurking in the shadows. And so repression doesn't really solve the problem. It just hides it.
Right. It's more like a temporary fix. And sometimes those buried feelings can manifest in other ways, like through physical symptoms, or anxiety, or even phobias.
It's like they're trying to find a way out, even if it's in a disguised form.
Exactly. And, repression, it's really just one example of a defense mechanism. There are others where the ego actually takes a much more active role.
Okay, so give me an example. What would a more active defense look like?
Well, there's one called identification with the aggressor.
Identification with the aggressor. Ooh, that one sounds a bit intimidating.
I know, right? It's a powerful one. Imagine a child who's really afraid of being punished.
Okay.
Instead of feeling powerless, they start to act out those very punishments they fear. They become the aggressor.
Wow. So it's like a way to manage their anxiety by taking control of the situation.
Exactly. It's like they're saying, if I'm the one in control, I don't have to be afraid.
I can see how that dynamic could play out, especially with kids. They
Yeah.
often imitate the adults around them, even when those adults are being, scary or authoritarian.
Exactly. And this defense mechanism, it can actually be a normal part of development.
Really?
Yeah, it can help kids develop a sense of agency and control, and it can even contribute to developing their conscience.
That's interesting. So it's not always a bad thing.
Not necessarily. It's all about balance. It becomes problematic if it becomes too extreme.
That makes sense. It's like anything, too much of a good thing can become a bad thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about repression and identification with the aggressor. Are there any others that might seem kind of counterintuitive at first?
Oh, definitely. Altruistic surrender is one that often surprises people.
Altruistic surrender. Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more about that one.
So it's when we project our own desires onto other people, and then we kind of live vicariously through them.
So someone's desire to help others, could that actually be a defense mechanism?
It's possible. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone who has repressed their own desires for a romantic relationship.
Okay, I'm following you.
They might become overly invested in their friends' love lives. They experience those relationships as if they were their own.
So it's not really about being selfless. It's more about fulfilling those unmet needs in a roundabout way. That makes me wonder, is there even such a thing as, pure altruism?
That's a deep question. And it gets to the heart of human motivation, Are we ever truly acting without any self-interest? Anna Freud actually connected this defense to, get this, the fear of death.
Wow, that's pretty heavy.
It is. By focusing on others, we can distract ourselves from our own mortality. It's a way of feeling connected to something larger than ourselves.
Okay, that's a really fascinating connection. So we've talked about repression, identification with the aggressor, and altruistic surrender. Are there any others that really stand out, especially ones that might be common during those, turbulent teenage years?
Oh, absolutely. Puberty is a time when these defense mechanisms can really go into overdrive.
Oh, I can imagine. Those teenage years are so intense.
Right, there's a huge surge in hormones. It's like throwing gasoline on the fire of the ed.
Oh, yikes. So all those primal urges become even more powerful.
Exactly. And the ego has to work extra hard just to keep things under control.
I think we all remember how challenging those teenage years can be. So which defense mechanisms tend to show up during that time?
Two that come to mind are asceticism and intellectualization.
Asceticism. Isn't that something like monks practice? What does that have to do with teenagers?
It's about renouncing pleasure. especially those related to sexuality.
Okay.
Teenagers, they're flooded with all these new desires and urges. It can feel really overwhelming.
Right. It's like everything is new and intense.
Exactly. So they might swing to the opposite extreme. They reject anything pleasurable, even stuff that's perfectly healthy and normal. It's like they're trying to control the quantity of their instincts rather than the quality.
So it's not about being good. It's about managing all that internal chaos.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, what about intellectualization?
Ah, yes. This one's all about using excessive thinking to manage emotions and impulses.
So it's like trying to outsmart your feelings.
Basically, it's
Yeah.
like you're trying to dissect your feelings under a microscope instead of actually experiencing them.
Oh, I remember doing that a lot as a teenager. It was like I was trying to outsmart my emotions by, like,
Yeah.
overthinking everything.
Right. And it's a way of using logic, as a shield against all those messy, unpredictable feelings.
It makes sense. But is that always a bad thing? I mean, isn't thinking a good thing?
Of course, thinking is essential, but when it becomes a way to avoid feeling, that's when it can be a problem.
So again, it's about finding that balance.
Right. Adolescence is all about navigating those extremes. It's a time of intense change and experimentation, and these defense mechanisms, as messy as they can be, are part of that process.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to see how these defense mechanisms are like pieces of a puzzle. They help us understand ourselves and the people around us in a whole new way. But I'm curious, are some of these defense mechanisms, like, healthier than others?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll definitely explore in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait. We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of the ego's fascinating world.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about these defense mechanisms, right? The tools our ego uses to navigate life's little challenges.
Right. And I think a lot of our listeners are probably wondering the same thing I am. Are some of these defenses, like, healthier than others? I mean, repression, that sounds pretty intense. Are there ways of coping that are, less extreme?
Absolutely. Anna Freud, she actually talked about a whole spectrum of defenses, from the more primitive ones, that kind of distort reality, to those that are much more mature and adaptive.
Okay, so let's talk about the healthier end of the spectrum. What are some examples of those defenses, the ones that can actually be beneficial?
Well, one that's considered quite mature is sublimation.
Sublimation. Okay, what's that?
Basically, those potentially destructive impulses from the id, they get channeled into something constructive, even creative.
Oh, so instead of acting on those urges in, like, a harmful way, you find a socially acceptable outlet for them.
Precisely. Imagine someone with, a lot of aggression. Instead of lashing out, they might become a surgeon or, a professional athlete. They're using that energy in a way that not only benefits them, but maybe even benefits society.
So it's like taking something that could be problematic and turning it into a positive force.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing. And humor is another great example. Being able to laugh at yourself, to find the humor in difficult situations, that can be incredibly powerful.
Oh, totally. It can diffuse anxiety, help you cope with stress. I even think it can strengthen your relationships, being able to laugh together.
Absolutely. Laughter truly is the best medicine sometimes.
Okay, so we've got sublimation, humor, any others?
Suppression can be adaptive too, as long as it's done, consciously, strategically.
So it's not the same as repression?
Not quite. It's more about choosing to set aside certain thoughts or feelings temporarily, knowing that you'll come back to them later, when you have the time and energy to process them fully.
It's like saying, okay, feeling, I hear you, but now's not the time to deal with you. I've got a presentation to give. I'll come back to you later.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing your mental resources, choosing your battles. But it's important to note, even these healthier defenses, they can become problematic if they're overused or used in the wrong way.
Right. So again, it's all about balance, finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. But how do we even know, how do we know when a defense mechanism has crossed the line from being helpful to being harmful? What are the warning signs?
Yeah, that's a good question. What should we be looking out for?
Well, one key indicator is rigidity. If someone is using the same defense over and over again, regardless of the situation.
They're stuck in a rut.
Exactly. It can be a sign that, it's become more of a crutch than a tool.
So it's about flexibility, being able to adapt, to the specific challenges we're facing, using different tools for different situations.
Exactly. Another red flag is when a defense mechanism is actually interfering with someone's ability to, function in their daily life? Are they isolating themselves, avoiding certain situations? Are their relationships suffering?
So it's like the defenses are backfiring, creating more problems than they're solving.
Exactly. It's not just about the defense itself. It's about its impact, on our overall well-being.
Okay, that makes sense. What else should we be paying attention to?
The intensity and frequency of the defense, are they having constant intrusive thoughts, engaging in unhealthy behaviors to cope with their anxiety? These could be signs that, professional help might be needed.
Right, so it's about being mindful,
Yeah.
of how these defenses are affecting us and seeking support when necessary.
Right.
And it's important to remember, it's not about judging ourselves.
Yeah.
For using those defenses, it's normal. It's part of being human. It's about learning how to use them in ways that support our well-being.
Well said. We've been talking about the ego and how it's constantly scanning for threats.
Right, always on high alert.
Anna Freud actually categorized 3 main types of anxiety, the ones that can actually trigger these defenses.
Okay, let's break those down. What are they?
So there's objective anxiety, superego anxiety, and instinctual anxiety.
Okay. Objective anxiety. Is that like regular fear, like I'm scared of spiders or heights, that kind of thing?
Well, it's more than just a fear of specific things. Objective anxiety, it's rooted in real threats in the external world.
Okay, so real danger.
Exactly. It's that primal fear response, the one that kicks in when we sense danger, whether it's physical danger or the threat of illness or even the potential for loss.
So it's that fight or flight response.
Exactly. It's what keeps us safe. But what about superego anxiety? That one sounds a bit more internal.
Yeah, like it's coming from within.
It is. Superego anxiety. It's all about those internalized moral standards and expectations, the ones we've absorbed throughout our lives, starting with our parents,
Right, all those shoulds and shouldn'ts.
Exactly. It's that feeling of guilt or shame when we think we've done something wrong or haven't lived up to those standards, like having an inner critic constantly judging us.
Oh, I think we can all relate to that feeling of not being good enough, no matter how hard we try.
It can be pretty paralyzing, and it often comes from, our early desire to please our parents, to avoid their disapproval, those early experiences. They can shape our superego and kind of determine how harshly we judge ourselves.
So it's about those early messages we get about, right and wrong, good and bad. They become part of our internal compass. But when that compass is too rigid, it can create a lot of unnecessary suffering.
Exactly. And then there's instinctual anxiety, probably the most fascinating of the 3.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about instinctual anxiety.
It gets to the core of that tension between our primal urges, right, and the constraints of society.
Okay, so the I versus the superego.
Exactly. It's the anxiety that comes from the fear that our impulses, those raw instinctual desires for pleasure and gratification, they'll overwhelm us and lead us to do things that are unacceptable or even harmful.
So it's that fear of losing control, of giving in to our darker impulses.
Exactly. And the defenses that come into play here, they're all about managing that tension between what we want and what we believe is right. It's the ego trying to maintain order, trying to prevent chaos.
It's like a constant negotiation between those competing forces within us.
Precisely. Now, all 3 of these anxieties, objective, superego, and instinctual, they can trigger different defense mechanisms. And understanding what type of anxiety someone is struggling with can be super helpful in understanding why they might be using certain defenses.
It's like a whole new way of understanding human behavior.
Yeah.
What else did Anna Freud say about these dynamics?
One of her biggest contributions was highlighting the role of the unconscious. She argued that a lot of our defenses, they operate outside of our awareness.
So we're not always aware of why we do the things we do. That's kind of freaky when you think about it.
It is a bit, isn't it? And that's where psychoanalysis comes in. It's about exploring those hidden depths, bringing those unconscious patterns into the light, and ultimately gaining more control over our lives.
It's like shining a light into the dark corners of our minds, seeing what's really there. So it's not just about understanding our defenses. It's about understanding the unconscious forces that are driving them.
Exactly. And Anna Freud also emphasized early childhood, how important those experiences are in shaping our personality and our defenses, our early relationships, especially with our parents. They create the foundation for how we relate to the world and how we cope with challenges.
So those early years, they really are so important. It's like they create the blueprint for how we navigate life.
Yeah.
But does that mean we're doomed to repeat those early patterns forever? If we had a difficult childhood, are we stuck?
Not at all. While those early experiences, they can have a lasting impact, they don't determine our destiny. We can always change. We can always grow, even if we had a rough start.
That's reassuring. It's like we have the power to rewrite those early scripts.
We do. And speaking of power, Anna Freud, she also highlighted how resilient the ego is, how adaptable it is. She saw it as this dynamic force, constantly learning, evolving as we face new challenges.
So the ego is not just a passive victim of our impulses and anxieties. It's actually this powerful force for growth and healing.
Exactly. It's our inner superhero, constantly working to keep us safe and help us thrive.
I love that. So even when we're struggling or feeling overwhelmed, there's this underlying strength, this capacity for growth within us.
Absolutely. Now, as fascinating as all this is, I'm sure our listeners are wondering, what can I actually do with this information?
That's a great point. It's one thing to understand these defenses, but how can we actually apply this knowledge to our own lives? How can we make it practical?
That's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait. We'll be back soon to continue our journey into the fascinating world of the ego. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been spending all this time talking about ego defense mechanisms, those like sneaky strategies our minds use to deal with anxiety.
You know, I have to say, I'm starting to see them everywhere now.
I bet. It's like once you know what to look for, you can't unsee it.
Exactly. Like I'm noticing things in myself and other people. It's pretty wild. But as fascinating as all of this is, I'm sure our listeners are wondering, what can I do with this information? Like, it's one thing to understand how these defenses work, but how can we actually use this knowledge to improve our lives, make it practical? That's the real question, isn't it? And honestly, there's no magic formula. No one-size-fits-all solution. But there are definitely some things we can do, some practical steps to become more aware of those defenses and, learn to use them in a healthier way. One approach I find really helpful is mindfulness practice.
Mindfulness.
Yeah.
I've been hearing a lot about that lately.
Oh.
Isn't that all about, like, meditation?
Well, meditation is definitely a part of it. But mindfulness is really about, cultivating a certain kind of attention.
Okay.
It's about paying attention to our present moment experience, our thoughts, feelings, and sensations. With curiosity and non-judgment, just noticing those thoughts and feelings without getting, swept away by them.
So it's like creating some space,
Yeah.
right, between us and our reactions. Instead of just automatically going into defense mode, we can pause, we can observe what's actually happening.
Exactly. That pause is crucial. It gives us the chance to choose how we want to respond. We can ask ourselves, what's really going on here? What need is this defense mechanism trying to meet? And maybe even, is there a healthier way I can address this need?
It's not about getting rid of those defenses entirely.
Right.
It's more about understanding them and then making conscious choices about how we want to react.
Precisely.
I'm also thinking about therapy. I think a lot of people have this idea that therapy is only for people who are, really struggling.
Yeah, they have to have some serious mental health issue to even consider it.
It's a common
I'm in this conception. Therapy can be helpful for anyone who wants to understand themselves better or improve their relationships or just live a more fulfilling life.
So it's like having a guide on this journey of self-discovery, someone who can help you, unpack those unconscious patterns and figure out new ways of relating to yourself and the world around you.
Exactly. And a good therapist, they can create this really safe, supportive space for you so you can explore those vulnerable parts of yourself and experiment with new ways of being.
I'm also thinking about self-compassion. It seems like a big part of this because often those defenses, they're rooted in the sense of shame, or unworthiness. Like we're trying to protect ourselves from judgment, from others, but also from ourselves.
That's such an important point. Self-compassion is key. It's essential. If we want to break down those defenses that are keeping us stuck, it's about recognizing that we're all imperfect. We all make mistakes. And those imperfections, they don't make us any less worthy of love or belonging.
No, it's about treating ourselves with kindness.
Yeah.
With understanding, like we would treat a good friend.
Exactly. And when we do that, when we cultivate self-compassion, we create this more supportive internal environment. We're less afraid to be ourselves. And we're less likely to rely on those rigid defenses that, just keep us small.
One of the biggest takeaways for me from this whole deep dive is that these defense mechanisms, they're not the enemy. They're part of us. They actually show our resilience, our ability to grow. They're the tools our ego uses to deal with this crazy, complex world.
Absolutely. The more we understand those tools, the better we can use them, to create lives that are meaningful, fulfilling, aligned with our values. It's about recognizing those defenses, figuring out what they're protecting, and finding healthier ways to address those needs.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. I really feel like I have a whole new understanding of myself and the people around me.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, this journey of self-discovery, it's a lifelong thing. So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep growing.
That's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon to, explore more fascinating topics, unpack more complex ideas, and help you understand the world around you and the world within you just a little bit better. Until then, stay curious.